Broadcasting from Studio A here at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs, it's time for the Gardening Simplified Show with Stacy Hervella, me, Rick Weist, and our engineer and producer, Adriana Robinson. Well, do you need a spectacular hedge or romantic, stunning cut flowers, or maybe a knock-your-socks-off specimen plant? Then a Panicle Hydrangea may be just the answer. This show is in praise of panicles. And Stacy, have you ever met somebody famous? You know you're going to be meeting this person and you're telling yourself, don't say something stupid. Don't be stupid. And then, of course, when you walk up to them, you say something stupid like, you're my biggest fan. I've done that. And I tell you what, Panicle hydrangeas are like a rock star. And I have read, including material that you've written, Stacy, that it is a fabulous blooming plant for those who consider themselves maybe black thumbs.
The so-called black thumb, yeah, they're definitely one of the easiest and most rewarding plants, flowering shrubs, perennials, anything that you can grow. I mean, it really is that simple. But, before we get too far into it, last time was our 100th episode.
Yeah.
We put out a survey for our listeners to fill out. And a couple of listeners, I just want to acknowledge this, said they had a, quote, hydrangea hangover, that we've been doing an awful lot about hydrangeas. And this is true. And to those people, we're sorry. This was already planned to do this show. But stick with us because, honestly, even if you're like a hydrangea hater, and they're out there, this is a plant that is worth growing because, honestly, I can think of very, very few plants, again, perennials, flowering shrubs, trees, whatever, that require so little and give so much for so long.
Yeah, absolutely. Panicle hydrangeas, I'm a big fan. Now, word of the day, a panicle is, and stick with me here, a panicle, when we're talking about flowers and plants, things botanical, is a branched raceme in which each branch has more than one flower. Now, my description is just a multitude or cluster of flowers on a stem forming a cone shape like inflorescence. But technically, it's a simple inflorescence in which the flowers are borne on short stalks about equal length at equal distances along an elongated axis. Whew, man, losing me here. Raceme is word of the day. It's spelled R-A-C-E-M-E. I guess the way to just put it simply, Stacy, is the flower has the wow factor and in many cases look as big as footballs.
I can't get over the fact that raceme, as you just spelled it, R-A-C-E-M-E, as a runner, you're not saying race me.
Because it looks like that, race me. But it's raceme,
It's
right?
raceme, yes, you are correct.
Yeah. So anyhow, nothing says August like panicle hydrangeas in the landscape. Great thing about these plants is that they are very cold hardy. They're reliable and quite easy to grow. As a matter of fact, Proven Winners has a great link, a great page that you can go to. I believe you wrote it, Stacy, about panicle hydrangeas, and we'll put it on the website, gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. Now, I kind of like to refer to their flower shapes as lacy or mop heads, football mops. You can get both with panicle hydrangeas.
That is correct. So a lot of people think that a mop head hydrangea is a type of hydrangea, as in like they'll refer to big leaf hydrangeas, Hydrangea macrophylla, as a mop head hydrangea, and that is true. But really, any of the different species of hydrangeas that we can grow in our gardens can, in theory, be a mop head or a lace cap. And nowadays, it is the mop head versions of panicle hydrangeas that are easily the most popular.
All right. And one of the things that makes them popular, certainly with me, is transitional color. As the season progresses, the color on many of these panicle hydrangeas is transitional, not based on a chemical change to the soil. Stacy, my gut tells me from years of growing panicle hydrangeas that it's the amount of sunlight, maybe the decrease in day length, maybe temperature, maybe the amount of available water. Am I right in surmising that?
Yeah, all those factors combine. But there's another one that's really important, and that is genetics. So, Panicle Hydrangeas nowadays, and I'm going to talk about this in Plants on Trial, they do turn amazing colors. And that is one of the factors that here at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs, we specifically look for in Panicle Hydrangeas, is that they are aging to not just a color, not just a pink or red color, but to a really vibrant, rich, and bright color. And so while all of those factors are true, the heat, especially the nighttime temperatures, moisture, the age of your plant, those all contribute to how well your plant colors up. But there is an inherent capability for specific colors and the vividness of those colors in each plant that, even if you have all conditions right, if it's not a plant that's going to take on really vivid tones, it's not going to do it in your garden either.
I love that. Now, of course, Panicle Hydrangeas have enjoyed over the past years this renaissance of sorts because early in my career, I just remember Panicle Hydrangeas as being gigantic and monstrous. And now there are so many wonderful, we're going to call them dwarf varieties. And Stacy will talk about that further on today's show. I know that when I was in television, certainly during the months of July, August, and September, when we'd go out and about, recording, I would often immediately look for the panicled hydrangeas because, boy, do they make a great backdrop for television, right?
They do. Backdrop for photos, for television. I mean, they are just so showy and so beautiful. And they just flower so much. They're not one of those plants where you're like, oh, that's blooming. It's just like a wall of flowers. And, that's what people love so much about them is you don't have to be a super gardener or know anything. I mean, this is pretty much as close as you can get to a foolproof plant. You put it in the ground, you water it, and then, 3 years later, your neighbors are running across the street to compliment you on your plant. And I never knew you were a gardener.
I love that. And of course, you can use it as a specimen plant. There are tree hydrangeas, hydrangea essentially grafted to a standard, right?
Well, actually, most Panicle Hydrangea standards are not grafted.
Oh.
A lot of people think that they are. And they can be grafted, but actually the majority of them are grown and trained that way specifically. So if you ever had a Panicle Hydrangea, you've probably seen this, and probably some of our listeners have too, where it starts to grow in the spring, and it puts out like these big, long, thick broomstick-like stalks. So that ability is what actually lets it be grown as a standard. So what they do typically is plant up a hydrangea, Panicle hydrangea in the ground, let it grow for 2 seasons so it develops that nice big root mass, and then they whack the whole thing back down to the ground. And then what's going to happen, because it has all the energy in that root mass to recover from that severe pruning, the first straight stem that comes up from that's going to be the trunk. Mm-hmm. Then they let that grow up to a certain height. Then they cut that, and then it's going to branch, and then you're going to get that nice full look. And so that is why, as I'm sure our listeners have seen and experienced, if you want a tree-form standard hydrangea, they're going to cost you a pretty penny.
They're pricey.
They are very pricey. And the reason for that is because they have all of that extra time and effort in raising them. Fortunately, they are pretty much just as easy to care for, a tiny bit trickier than your regular standard Panicle hydrangea, but I think people feel a lot more motivated to make sure they're taking care of it when they're shelling out, $350 for a standard Panicle hydrangea.
But it does bring up the point. One of my favorite things about Panicle hydrangeas are the stout branches and the fact that pruning is easy, because it's kind of difficult to make a pruning mistake with a Panicle hydrangea, in my opinion. But those stout branches that can hold up those big, gorgeous blooms. So, Stacy, just for you, I wrote a limerick in praise of panicles. My lovely, colorful panicle, your blooms are simply gigantical. In August, you will star in a colorful repertoire, classic and botanical. You certainly put me in the limelight with blossoms that stand tall, upright. Based on your blooming prowess, my neighbors are sure to assess. I'm an expert, not a neophyte. Blooming over much of the USDA from now until Labor Day. Clip some blooms for all your rooms and enjoy a stunning bouquet. That's my best shot.
I like it. I think you've got a lot of like-minded listeners out there with that one.
I love it. So, Panicle hydrangeas, you want to grow them. Stacy's going to get into some of the varieties. As a matter of fact, Stacy, on our channel recently, you did a YouTube video with Adriana of one of my favorite varieties, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but we're going to put the link on the website, gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. But this is such a gorgeous Panicle hydrangea because of the color in it.
Quick Fire Fab.
Quick Fire Fab.
My Quick Fire Fab video. Yeah, it is.
Love it.
It is such a cool plant. And I'll tell you, Adriana and I filmed that video on the perfect day. I mean, they are just gorgeous. So if you need some Panicle hydrangea inspiration, you watch that video. It'll be linked in the comments.
I love that video. It is inspirational, so make sure to watch it. So with Panicle hydrangeas, to meet their full potential, I'm going to say avoid shade. Give them as much sunlight as possible. Remember, they appreciate pruning. Maybe pruning as much as a third a year. We'll see what Stacy has to say about that. And I think two things that you have to do. Number one, don't over-fertilize. And number two, watch the water. They are going to need some water. I've seen Panicle hydrangeas in August or September enduring drought stress. I know at the marina here on the lake shore, they have some Panicle hydrangeas in pots that are just simply suffering because nobody pays attention to them. Dry as a bone, and you can see them suffer. So water is going to be important.
Water is important, just like for any other hydrangea. And even though Panicle hydrangeas are the most sun and drought tolerant in that they will be able to survive, not necessarily thrive, as the hydrangeas at the marina can attest, the one way that you can kill a Panicle hydrangea quickly is too much water. They are actually very sensitive to overwatering. So it's not that they're tricky to water. You just want to make sure that you're not flooding them because they can recover from it, but they will be very, very sad and resentful if you happen to overwater them.
Well, let's see what Stacy has on her mind in Plants on Trial. That's coming up next on today's show in praise of panicles here on the Gardening Simplified Show.
Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show, an episode dedicated to the Panicle hydrangea, the hydrangea that if you need a housewarming gift for someone and you aren't sure, what their gardening skill level is, this is the plant that you bring, Panicle hydrangeas, because it's just one of those plants that just keeps giving. And even if they're, snooty and like, oh, I don't like hydrangeas, Panicle hydrangeas are not the typical hydrangea. They don't have like the big round blue or purple blooms. You can get ones that are very, distinguished and less showy. You can get some that will draw all the focus away from everything else in your landscape except that plant.
And that'd be better than getting an aloe plant or a cactus or maybe cut flowers from the gas station on their way over.
Well, that's for sure. Yeah, stop at the garden center, get a nice Panicle hydrangea. And, they are so hardy. So they're cold tolerant all the way down to USDA Zone 3 and heat tolerant through USDA Zone 8 at least, which is, a huge range. And, we talk about reliability. Very easy to grow because they flower on new wood. But, I am digressing. This is time for Plants on Trial. We're talking about one specific Proven Winners plant. And I'll tell you, it was hard to pick because we do have 12 different Panicle hydrangeas in the line. But if we're dedicating a show to Panicle hydrangeas, then you know what? There's really just no other choice than the OG, the one that started it all, Limelight hydrangea.
I like it.
And, I wanted to take this opportunity. And so in Mailbag, we're going to talk more about growing them and the things you need to know to grow Panicle hydrangeas. But I thought it was a good opportunity to tell this story and kind of create this context for our Panicle hydrangea show because it's a pretty interesting story. And a lot of our listeners, I think, probably aren't even aware of how much Limelight hydrangea has just completely changed the hydrangea landscape, literally and figuratively, in the U.S. and Canada.
Now, I do know because being in the garden center industry over 40 years, I remember the years when basically we had a plant called tardiva.
Yeah.
And that was about it.
That was pretty much it, yeah. So panicle hydrangeas are native to Asia. You can find them in Taiwan, Japan, Korea, all the way up through Sakhalin Island, which is off the coast of Russia. And so that's like a pretty broad climate area. And it took a long time for them to kind of come over here. But the very first one that became popular in Western culture was grandiflora. So the original PG hydrangea. So if you've heard that term before, PG hydrangea, it derives from this specific variety, Hydrangea paniculata, that's the P, and grandiflora, that's the G. So that kind of gave way to all of these names. And that was around the late 1800s in France that the original PG hydrangea started to become very popular in gardens. And then came tardiva. And, these were fine plants. They're very pretty. They're still around. In fact, you can still grow them and find them, although they're harder to find now that there have been so many improvements. And they were fine plants. They were certainly pretty, but a couple of issues. They bloomed fairly late in the season, especially in cooler climates like ours. And they had pretty weak stems, so they didn't really hold those blooms upright. They kind of just, bent over and gave a very soft and rather informal look in the landscape. They were also all lace caps. So we talked a little bit about mophead versus lace cap. So they had that more open and lacy bloom rather than the dense bloom. And, at best, as the flowers aged through the season, they maybe took on a little pink flush, but overall they were just kind of meh. So they just, weren't, they were pretty, but they just weren't, they were a far cry from what we all think of now as panicle hydrangeas. But that was pretty much all there was. And so they were around, but you didn't really see them all that often. So
they are a great example, Stacy, of what Tim Wood says here. We are living in the golden age of plant breeding.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So in the 1990s, Tim Wood, who Rick just mentioned, and Dale Deppy, the owner of the nursery here, first encountered limelight hydrangea at Peter Zwijnenberg's nursery in Boskoop in the Netherlands. And they knew it was something special because they were really familiar with everything that was already on the market, what people's complaints about it was. And so Peter had developed limelight at his nursery there, and they saw this thing, and they just knew that this was a game changer. They could tell that it had much stronger stems, so it didn't have that weepy kind of floppy look that older panicle hydrangeas had. The blooms were just this beautiful, bright, glowing, fresh green that no one had ever seen before. And, all in all, it was just a great plant. So they brought it back to the U.S., so now we're back into the 1990s here. Brought it back here to West Michigan. So believe it or not, a lot of people don't realize that limelight hydrangea had its start in North America right here in West Michigan, which is a pretty amazing historical connection. I mean, we have a great agricultural history here anyway, but you can add that to the Haven peaches and all of the other amazing things that have been invented here and developed here. And they started trialing it here at our nursery in West Michigan. And they discovered that limelight was performing just as beautifully here in North America as it had been in Europe. And that was also revolutionary because a lot of the panicle hydrangeas like grandiflora and tardiva did a lot better in Europe. The summers tended to be a little bit more cooler, a little bit milder. Nighttime temperatures tended to be cooler. So their performance really was night and day. You brought them over here, things were not, they just didn't look as good. But they found out bringing limelight here that it looked just as beautiful as it did in Europe when they brought it back here. And they said, this is a no-brainer. We are going to introduce this. People are going to love it. And you know what happened? The industry laughed at us. The industry literally laughed at us. They rolled their eyes, and several people said, no one will ever buy a green flower. Like and this is sort of one of those like Steve Jobs kind of, stories like, oh, no one will ever do that. And obviously that was not the case. People instantly loved it. And despite their hesitation of these growers who said, no one will ever buy a green flower plant, people want colorful flowers. One thing that limelight had going for it in the eyes of these naysayers is that it is an extremely easy plant to grow and produce from a grower perspective. As a plant grower, they're going to be trimming plants. They've got a lot of work to do to get it to the point where it can go into a garden center and you're buying a nice, big, beautiful shrub. But limelight, compared to other panicle hydrangeas, didn't need as much pruning and trimming. It looked better after it was trimmed and pruned. It was just a plant where they said, okay, well, you know what? We don't have that much invested in this. This is easier to grow, so we'll try it. We'll see how this goes. And people went bananas. I mean, people had never seen anything like limelight. And it was one of those plants that once, sort of the gardeners in the neighborhood started to grow it and have it in their garden, their neighbors were like, oh, what's that? Oh, well, that's limelight hydrangea. Great, memorable name, and very descriptive of what the plant actually looks like. And that started getting people who maybe didn't go to the garden center or weren't really into landscaping to go to the garden center and ask for limelight and plant limelight in their yard and discover how easy it was to grow. And so panicle hydrangeas have really spread, I think, from word of mouth, from people saying like, what is that? I want that. And seeing that, hey, my neighbor is not out there all the time, working, breaking their back, trying to get this thing to grow. Like I never even see them do anything to it. And it looks this great all the time. So it kind of spread, just through this organic word of mouth, just noticing what it was and people asking. But then people were like, okay, limelight's cool, but it's big. It gets to be 6 to 8 feet tall. So what else? And when we saw the success of limelight, of course, we started looking at what else can we do with this plant. And so in succession, a number of different varieties came out, most notably Little Lime, which is a dwarf version of limelight. So if you don't have room for that 6 to 8 foot tall and wide limelight, you can grow a 3 to 5 foot tall and wide Little Lime. And, that just sort of unrolled this whole class of new panicle hydrangeas. Like I said, we now have 12 in the Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs line. And we have a field of panicle hydrangeas that we use in our R&D that you would not believe. I can't show it to you, unfortunately, but it is stunning. And every year we are evaluating literally thousands of different potential new selections of panicle hydrangeas. And, we understand now really what it takes to make a great panicle hydrangea. What people want. We're looking for earlier bloom times. We're looking for stronger stems. We're looking for those bright, vivid colors as the flowers age.
And Limelight Prime is evidence of that?
Limelight Prime is a great example of that. So Limelight Prime is sort of improves on some of the factors of Limelight. So Limelight does not have a lot of liabilities, but it does have somewhat weaker stems than more modern cultivars do. And one of the biggest issues with Limelight is it blooms pretty late. I have been on Mackinac Island when Proven Winners was doing the Grand Garden Show, where Limelight was only just starting to come into bloom at the end of August. So Limelight Prime blooms earlier. We want plants that people can enjoy by their pool in the summer when they're actually outside, not,
before you go back to school.
Yeah, not when you're thinking mums. You want to be thinking panicle hydrangeas and poolside. And so the plant has just come so far, and it's just so amazing to me that it really all does come down to Limelight and what Limelight did to change the industry and to change homeowners' minds about what a panicle hydrangea could and should be. So every time you grow a limelight hydrangea, you are literally growing a piece of horticultural history.
That's awesome.
So I didn't get into a lot of how to grow panicle hydrangeas, but we're going to do that next in the mailbag, so please stay tuned. Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show, where the topic of the day is panicle hydrangeas, a plant that people love. You have to only see it once, and then you're like, I want that. And, that's another thing that I think is somewhat of a problem for panicle hydrangeas is because they do bloom late in summer. So when people go to the garden center, they don't look like much.
Yeah.
They walk right by them. And that's
true.
one of the reasons why I think people are so shocked when they see them in bloom. Like, wow, what is that? I can get that,
That's why you need to be shopping in garden centers in August.
It's true. Yeah, you'll definitely see some great plants in bloom in August. Always worth stopping by. So, that's one reason I think why it takes some knowledge and some planning. And, if you do live in a hot climate, you're going to want to wait probably another 6 weeks or so before you could add a panicle hydrangea to your garden. So I would say that's like USDA zone 7 or 8. You'll want to wait till it's cooler. But if you live in a cooler climate, USDA zones 3 through 6, now is a perfectly fine time to plant a panicle hydrangea if you would like. The only caveat I really have for that when we're talking about planting in August is a lot of people go on vacation. And so if you are going to be going on vacation, you might want to wait until after your vacation, unless you have a very trustworthy neighbor that can keep an eye on the watering of your new panicle hydrangea, because of course they are going to want some water while they're getting established. And one of the questions that I hear so much from people that I think is really the cause of confusion is how much sun can panicle hydrangeas take? And so our tags, if you look at a Proven Winners Color Choice Panicle Hydrangea tag in the store, they say full sun and part sun. So that's a minimum of 6 hours a day for full sun and 4 to 6 hours or filtered light through the day for part sun. And so people will say, well, which is it? And, one of the things is that we sell our plants across the entire country and the US and Canada. And that's a lot of different climates. So generally speaking, in cooler climates, you can absolutely plant panicle hydrangeas in full sun, 6 hours or more. You are going to want to mulch them. You are going to definitely want to provide supplemental water while they're getting established. And then after that, anytime it's very hot and unusually dry. And that, again, the plant will survive dry conditions, but it's not going to look amazing.
Stacy, the easy approach for me in the garden center, generally I will say to people, if you have a half a day of sun or more, you're going to be good. Is that a good, simple approach?
That's definitely a good, simple approach, especially for the Midwest.
Yeah.
Now, if you live in a hot climate, you're definitely going to want to go more with that part sun, especially during the hottest part of the day. So if you're going to have some shade, it should be in that afternoon area. And, filtered light all day is a very good option in the South. So really the answer here is, full sun if you live in a cooler climate, definitely part sun. If you live in a hotter area, a little bit of morning sun is okay, but you're going to want to make sure that it's shaded during the hottest part of the day, which is going to, minimize how much water it needs. And it's also going to keep the flowers looking fresher and better rather than all of that stress of all that sunshine and heat coming at them all the time.
So, Stacy, we get to the question, why are my panicle hydrangeas not blooming? And before we get into that, for those keeping score at home, let me quickly give you the roster, the lineup, Stacy. Let's see if I get this right. Bobo, Firelight, Firelight Tidbit, Limelight, Limelight Prime, Little Lime Punch.
Yeah.
Pufferfish.
Pufferfish, great plant.
You got me interested in pufferfish, and I have it in my landscape. I love that plant. Little Quickfire, Tiny Quickfire, Pinky Winky Prime.
Yes, that is a rough look at the roster.
A rough look at the roster. There's your starting lineup. Now, why isn't it blooming, Stacy?
Well, so all panicle hydrangeas flower on new wood, or another way of saying that is in the current season's growth. So basically what that means is that they will start to create their flower buds for this summer in spring when they leaf out. Right. So they won't have any flower buds on them in winter. Come next April, they'll start to leaf out and they'll start creating the flower buds that will open that summer. So this kind of reduces the risk of losing flowers like old wood blooming hydrangeas, like big leaf hydrangeas have, where they're on the plant for so long that they have to make it through winter and all of these other challenges in order to bloom the following summer. So it eliminates that. So these are not typically the types of hydrangeas that people have trouble getting to bloom. They are extremely reliable.
Great.
But there are a couple of things that I think people do need to know and be aware of because, I hate when we are talking about how reliable and easy and fabulous a plant is, and then someone tries it and it's not going well for them, and then they're just like, well, what's wrong with me? It's not you. But a couple of things, you should be aware of. So number one is if the plant is pruned too late in spring, that can cut off the flower buds. So you definitely don't really want to wait until the leaves are starting to expand and get larger. Mm-hmm. I recommend pruning this either in fall when it's completely dormant, so like after Thanksgiving, or late winter to early spring. And if you're nervous about it, you can wait till the buds just start to emerge, and that will help you understand, where that growth is coming from. But if you wait too long into April and you start pruning then and the plant's really leafing out, you could be cutting off flower buds for the summer. That's not as common, but it does happen.
Yeah, and plus dormant pruning is just smart. You do a better job, in my opinion, when the plant is dormant. You do a better job of creating a shape.
Yeah.
Taking out weak branches, that sort of thing. I think it's the ideal time to prune.
Yep, definitely. Okay, so that's one reason. Another reason is deer. Now, overall,
oh dear, here we go.
Hydrangeas are not generally deer resistant. I think if you look at all 6 types of hydrangeas that people grow in our gardens, you will see varying degrees of interest that the deer have in hydrangeas. But panicle hydrangeas are high on that list. They love them. And what they specifically love is the flower buds. And it's interesting to me. I can't tell you how many people have written me and said, oh, this thing isn't bloomed every year beautifully. This year it's not blooming. I don't know why. And if I zoom in on the photo that they sent, I can see deer damage. And the damage is not like you might see on something like a daylily or a hosta where it's just like a stem sticking out. They like the flower buds so much that they can get their little mouth right in there and just snip out the flower bud. And you barely even notice that they've done it. They're very, very precise. So if you have deer or even occasionally see deer, know that they love these plants and they can be very, very good at taking out the flowers without even leaving a whole lot of evidence that they were there in the first place.
That's one of the things about deer damage that drives me crazy is when they just go for the flowers. I mean, if you're going to just destroy the whole plant then. Just get it over with, okay? But my gomphrenias and my spireas and, panicle hydrangeas, just get up in the morning and they've nipped the flowers off?
Yeah, it's so annoying. It's so sad. There is a third reason why your panicle hydrangea might not bloom, and that is if it is too young. So very often what I've seen happen is people go to the garden center and they buy a panicle hydrangea in bloom, looking fabulous. They get it home and they're like, hey, the next year, hey, why isn't it blooming? It was blooming when I bought it in June last year. Now here we are, July, it's not blooming. What's going on? And that's because it's blooming too early. But the other factor is that after you plant a shrub, it's going to spend its first year primarily growing roots in its new home. If you buy it in the nursery, it's already filled out that container with roots. It's pretty much maxed out the root growth that it can put on in a container. So that's why it's able to flower. Now, if you go home, you plant it. Now, this is not always the case, but it is sometimes the case. It's going to put all of its energy into growing roots. And the more roots it has, the more it can grow and flower. But sometimes if a hydrangea is slow to get established, maybe you're growing it in less than ideal conditions, it might take a year or so off of blooming and might not bloom until it's, 2 or 3 years in the ground. This isn't necessarily common, but I have seen it happen. I would say overall, it's more common in my experience with the dwarfer varieties, the smaller varieties, than the larger full-size varieties like Limelight and Pinky Winky. Simply because they're slower growing, so that it just takes them longer to get to that point. So I know that can be discouraging, but at least nothing's wrong. They just need a little bit more time. And this is why I think, regular watering, not overwatering, not underwatering, and a good 2 to 3 inch layer of shredded bark mulch are so important because those are going to create ideal conditions for root growth. Faster you can get those roots on, the faster you're going to have a panicle hydrangea that's going to have your neighbors running across the street to ask you what the heck you're growing.
And real quickly, Stacy, I've always felt that the change in color as the season progresses many times is caused by a shortening day length or cooler temperatures, but you're saying genetics play a big role.
Yes. So the genetics are going to determine what color it's going to turn and how vivid that color can be. But yes, you're absolutely right. Day length, so it's the shorter, as the days get shorter, which we're very much in right now here in August. As the days get shorter, that starts to trigger the change, and cooler nights also start to trigger the change. However, if you live in a hot climate and your nighttime temperatures are pretty consistently in the 70s or higher, that makes it very difficult for the plant to synthesize the color pigments that are responsible for that change. And so very often the flower will just turn brown and you won't get that color. And that is, of course, very disappointing. But sometimes it could just mean, that you need to maybe put it in more shade or give it a little more water. If you live in a cool climate and your hydrangea flowers are turning brown before they age, that is definitely an indicator that there's some sort of water stress going on. So, it's funny that we can talk so much about a plant that we keep telling you is so easy, but, the thing is, I want people to have the best results. So I want to give them the information that they need to know what to expect. And, as with any other plant, when you get it in the ground, it's going to go through a little period of adapting, but it will repay you with dividends for many years to come. Now, we're going to take a little break. When we come back, we have a horticultural all-star, Dr. Allan Armitage, coming on to talk about gardening in the heat. You aren't going to want to miss that, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show. Today for branching news, an interview with Dr. Allan Armitage. And Dr. Armitage is a well-known writer. He's a speaker, a horticulturist, born and raised in Quebec and Ontario, but later lived in East Lansing, Michigan, close to our studio here, probably 60, 70 miles away or so. And now he resides in Athens, Georgia. He has worked with landscape plants and greenhouse crops in the north and south, travels the world speaking and sharing his passion for plants, degrees from McGill University in Montreal, University of Guelph, and PhD from Michigan State University. Go Green. Allan, of course, has written many books, countless academic papers, articles, etc., etc. As a matter of fact, I have a number of Allan's books. Stacy, you can attest here. I have this one sitting on the desk. Armitage Garden Perennials, a color encyclopedia.
There you go. There you go.
This thing is worn out. As a matter of fact, Allan, you signed this on February 28th of 2004. You said, "Dear Rick, stay in touch. Life is good when you can play in the dirt."
Gosh, I still write that.
Well, thanks for joining us on the Gardening Simplified Show. It's an honor and privilege to have you on the show. And I want to start off our interview a minute here, Allan, by asking you a question that I've been asking greenhouse growers and garden center owners over the past few years, and that is, here we are in August. There were people visiting your greenhouse and garden center in April and May, buying their beautiful flowering annuals and their plants and all excited about them. What percentage of those plants are now still alive and thriving in the month of August? If you had to throw a percentage at that, Allan, what would you say?
That's fair of an answer, because it depends if it's my daughter buying them or me buying them. Truly. I'm actually sitting outside right now, and I'm watching the birds and the feeders and looking at my plants. And certainly, and I live in North Georgia right now. So while we are geographically in the foothills of the Smokies, it's hot as heck here. It's lovely today, actually, but I'm looking at probably 60, 80, about 80% of my plants are still here. But of my neighbor, who just stuck some plants on and just dug a hole, and they're probably 30% at most. So, I say that because it's we can really have a grand time with this, but what makes a plant successful? Of course, the breeding and yada yada yada, but also, obviously, part of it is the gardener. And while we can blame a lot on the plant, we can blame a lot on the gardener. I think the combination of a good plant and good practices, which are very simple, by the way, bring success to any garden.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to post a link on our website, gardeningsimplifiedonair.com, about how hot and dry it has been from the Ohio Valley all the way down into Georgia, with deficits of moisture. But Allan, I guess my question would be: I know that you are very big into solution gardening, helping people with solutions. What right off the top is the key? You know that hot, dry weather is coming in summer. What do you believe is the key? Is it the choice of the plants you make, or is it how you approach your garden?
Well, I think when I talk about solution gardening, I'm using this almost, as a title, solution gardening, because most people who are going into garden centers, And they may be extraordinarily good gardeners, or they may just be putzing around. But most people going into garden centers are not going in to find the newest euchre or the newest hydrangea. They're going in to find plants that work in the shade, find plants that deer don't eat, find plants that are for wet or for dry shade, find plants for fragrance, find plants because I want some flowers I can cut from my garden. So they're looking for solutions, and garden center operators, that's what they got to be keying in on. And us who kind of talk to gardeners, I just know that that's what people are asking. They're not asking for the newest plant. So I know it's going to be hot here, but it's going to be hot everywhere. So I use annuals a lot, and I use them as fillers for sometimes when my perennials go dormant or, unfortunately, kick the bucket. So, there's a lot of solutions for this hot stuff. And certainly you have to have the ability to water your plants. You have to have some shade, and you can't put a hosta on the back 40 in Ohio. I mean, I don't care. You got to understand that there is a difference between plants that tolerate shade and plants that don't.
Sure.
But that's common sense, and I'd like to get into that stuff with you as well. That I think most people, and people are listening to this show, they are not listening to it if they've never gardened before. They're listening to it because they want to just make it a little easier for themselves. New plants are great, and we can get all over new plants, be it hydrangeas or hostas or petunias for that matter. But what people are really looking for is how do I make my job easier?
Yeah. And, that's exactly what we're talking about with hydrangeas today is, getting people to be successful. And it's not just the plant choice, but it is the tools and the information. And, not everyone realizes that a hosta is not a plant you can just plop down anywhere in your yard and have look like, a beautiful plant like you might see in a magazine or something like that.
Yeah, it is all about people. And the plants that we breed some fabulous plants in this industry. There's spectacular things that you can have. But like you say, there's a bit of responsibility. I don't know if it's the garden center or the gardener, but there's a responsibility a little bit to say, there's information out there. It's easy for me to find that a hosta does not want full sun, or that a rose does not want to be under the pecan tree. I mean, there's that's out there. So, and the garden center certainly tries their best in many respects to say this is a plant for sun, this is a plant for shade. But I don't think anybody even has a clue what the difference between sun and shade are, other than, where you're standing in the sun, you're sweating, when you're in shade, you're not. But from the plant perspective, this is all about common sense. Mm-hmm. So, and just stop me here because I'm going to babble a bit, because these kind of things are the things that make life so much easier. So there is no such thing as a sun-loving or a shade-loving plant. No such thing. Plants don't love anything, okay? They tolerate. So that's the first thing. It's a shade-tolerant or a sun-tolerant plant. Okay, so what does that mean? You can go around, and I've done this thing with taking a piece of paper, a white paper, and saying, I see a shadow there, and I don't see a shadow there. So that's sun, that's shade. Common sense. Here's all you have to know about sun and shade. And it comes down to two words: Western exposure, or if you prefer, afternoon sun. Plants that can tolerate afternoon sun, the brutal 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock sun, are sun tolerant plants. The plants that cannot are shade tolerant. The only difference between a hosta and a rose is a rose will take all that brutal sun along with the rest of the day. A hosta will take all the morning sun you want, but come in the afternoon sun, it doesn't do well. Therefore, it's shade tolerant. So two words actually define what shade and sun plants are all about. Two words.
Interesting.
So, don't make it too serious. Of course, the shade changes and yada, yada. But you know where your back 40 is, full sun, and you know where your shade is. And that's all we got to do.
And how do you think?
It seems simple.
So how do you think that changes in the north versus hotter climates, whether that's the south or the southwest, or?
No, it's certainly the north. Like if I go back to Ontario or Quebec, I can see hostas in full sun. I do. I mean, I can't do it here. In fact, can't do it in much of the country. And the difference, of course, is while hosta might be a bit more sun tolerant in Minnesota or even in where you are in Upper Michigan, it's more shade tolerant as you go further. So, but yeah, I think certainly, but I think we'll always call a hosta. I'm just using hosta as an example. There's a ton of other plants, and impatiens. You can always, those will always be shade tolerant plants, and that all that means is you can put as much darn sun as a thing will take in the morning, but in some climates and most of the country, quite truthfully, they will not do as well if you put them in the afternoon sun. They still may grow. They still may survive, but they'll do better if a little shade on the afternoon.
We're chatting with Dr. Allan Armitage, a well-known writer, speaker, horticulturist, and Allan, that's a question we get a lot on this show, the difference between gardening in the north and gardening in the south, and all the people in the south who would love to be able to grow lilacs. You are in Athens, Georgia. Obviously, certain plants work better for you than they do here in the north and vice versa, right?
Yeah, well, again, having grown up in Montreal and then in southwestern Ontario, and having worked a lot in Canada, and then went to Michigan, which is balmy by comparison, and then down here in North Georgia, I have a pretty good feel for north and south. And I think the first thing that I can say globally, i.e. north-south, it's easier to garden in the north, period. It's easier. Now, I say that, and people in the north say, you've done winter, yada, yada. Well, as I kept telling people, in Montreal, let's use perennials or woodies if you like, but in Montreal, the plants are either fabulous or dead. I mean, there was nothing in between, right? I mean, they either work beautifully or they're dead. So, like in the south, we can get that whole thing where they just trying to do well, but they just struggle and they're just hanging in there. And so it's much more difficult, I think, and I say more difficult. Heat is far more debilitating on a plant than cold is. In fact, cold is absolutely necessary for best garden plants. Obviously too cold, plants will die, but that's just because we're putting a plant in that, it's not tolerate that much cold. But cold is essential, particularly for temperate garden plants, which are all your perennials, all your shrubs, most of your trees. So that's why it's much easier to garden in the north and the south. And the further south you go, the less cold you get. That's why we can't grow a tulip to save our lives here. Mind you, most people in this country can't grow a tulip more than 2 years anyway, but because they need that cold for the new bulb to form. And that's just one example. And I think we could go on and on. I don't want to bore you to death, but cold is important. So I think people in the north, you can't, I can grow a much better crepe myrtle than you can. My caladiums are spectacular. Yours are still got to get going, but we both grow good lilies. We both grow extraordinary good phlox. We both grow hydrangeas. There's not a lot of difference in plant choices. Yes, lilacs and delphiniums, but hell, I couldn't grow delphiniums in Montreal either. So, those are the kind of things that Fantasyland says we ought to grow. But, I can grow this Kim lilac. I can grow some lilacs here. They're not the same, but we're doing just fine. But the furthest, I was zone 7, now I'm zone 8. But, if you go down to Florida, it's a whole other world. You go down into Louisiana, the Gulf Coast is a whole other world. Southern California, a whole different world from what we're talking about. But where we are, zone, let's say 2 to 8, it's not that much different, except that we might need a little more water every now and then because it gets hot and dry at times.
What about some of the other challenges of gardening in hot climates, like, for example, weeds or pests? How does gardening in a hot climate affect that?
Okay. Now, again, I'm going to tell you things from based on my experience. There's no more pests here than there are up there. In fact, I think there's fewer. You complain about mosquitoes and black flies up there. We got mosquitoes here for sure, but nothing like you do. We've got, you think about pests, well, powdery mildew. Everybody gets powdery mildew. I mean, if it rains and it's a susceptible phlox, it's going to be powdery mildew where you are, powdery mildew where I am. I don't believe that again, if you're gardening in a swamp and, no matter where you are, it's going to look like heck. But plants that are susceptible to certain diseases are no more susceptible here than they are there. And I say that based on experience. I'm sure that lots of your listeners will bicker with me, but the fact is that's true. And as far as, critters like I don't know, aphids and whiteflies and all that stuff. I get them, you get them, we all get them. But I don't think they're any worse here. I really don't.
Allan, as I said, I've read a number of your books. You have a number of book titles. As a matter of fact, what is the most recent book that you can share with us?
This is funny. So, your listeners may not know me from Adam's House Cat, but the fact is, I am told that I am the guru of perennials. I'm told that I know all there is to know and yada yada. And I've written books on perennials and climbers and natives and annuals, this, that, and the other thing. And so those are really well-known books. The perennial book you talked about is well-known. The great big one, I'm told, is the Bible of perennials. The book that I sell 10 to 1 of any book that I've ever written is books on cut flowers. 10 to 1.
Wow.
My latest book, there is a huge, and again, I don't know if I'm sure you're aware of it. If when I often talk about trends, the greatest increase in volume of growers, i.e. gardeners, growers, if you like, are those who are growing cut flowers.
And why
cut flowers, not only in the garden, but growing it for the farmer's market, growing it for florists, domestic production of cut flowers. That has gone through the roof. First of all, there's a whole lot more thought about local flowers. Okay, when I say thought, the florists even want local flowers. The florist can get on the phone to their broker and get anything they want from Holland, Ecuador, Colombia, just like Amazon. They can get them. But they love local flowers. So if somebody is growing local phlox or snapdragons or zinnias or whatever they're growing, they have markets both in the farmers markets, which have expanded exponentially. So they have a market for that stuff. Now, I'm not saying we're getting rich here. I'm just saying that people are doing this, and there are cut flower growers throughout the country. There's over 2,000 members of the Association of Specialty Cut Flower Growers. These are people that are maybe gardening, growing on an acre, half an acre. And there are large cut flower growers. We have one near us that you would love to visit with me, and they do dahlias up the wazoo and everything else. So, and they ship them all over the country. But that has just expanded exponentially. So the latest book just came out this year, this March. It's called the Field Guide to Specialty Cut Flowers. So we designed this one so it's tough, and you can throw it in the back of your truck. You can throw it, you can just take it with you, and it's almost like a bit of an Audubon guide where it just says this is what you do. Here's how you propagate. Here's how you cut. Here's when you cut. Here's some cultivars that work. Yada yada. And that is a companion to my other book on cut flowers, which was done about 20 years ago, which is still very popular. So anyway, you asked, well, what's happening? Everybody. I'm very fortunate that those titles have resonated, and who knew?
That's fantastic. Well, we will.
And people like cutting their own stuff, of course. So
we will definitely put the link to Allan's books and, of course, his website on our website, gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. So make sure to look for it. Allan, as I said, I have always enjoyed reading your books. I love how you paint pictures with words, the humor, of course. And I have a suggestion for you, and that is I think you should write a book titled "It's Easier to Garden in the North Than It Is in the South."
Yeah, nobody will believe me. That's the problem. I'm sitting here. I'm sitting here outside, and it's supposed to be too hot, but it's wonderful. So I love Michigan. I love where you guys are. And I love, of course, back to Canada, but and here. But I'm as far south as my body will allow me to go. There's no doubt about it. But there's 4 seasons here, and that's really important to me, as it is to just about anybody who appreciates a bit of winter.
Allan, always a pleasure to talk to you. And before we let you go, I do have to ask you a question. We always ask folks this when we interview them. I have always done this, and that is I always ask an individual such as yourself if you have a favorite plant. A very unfair question, but do you have a favorite plant, and would you share with us?
Well, I'll tell you the plant that I would not be without, and it's a plant that I think if you're starting a garden, you don't have a clue what you're doing, assuming it can grow it, of course. I mean, you know, cold-wise, heat-wise, is a Japanese maple. I have in my little garden, and everybody is invited who's listening to come to beautiful Athens, Georgia. I love it. It's a horticultural paradise here. But in my garden, looking at right now, which is just a 60 by 100 lot, I got 14 Japanese maples here.
Wow.
And they are just the backbone. And everything else, you know, you can just put around them, under them, through them. I got clematis growing up them. I've got stuff on the base. But that's my favorite plant in that I could not do without it. I mean, right now I'm looking at a Rex begonia vine, which is in a grape family. It's my favorite plant right now, but you know, who's got that for sale?
Yeah, I wish I could find that locally. I love that plant.
It's fabulous. And it's growing up through here. It's an annual for me, but so what? That's the other thing. I think we could do this 3 or 4 times, guys, about common sense about annuals versus perennials, pruning, fertilizing, all that stuff, but we could take care of that in about 5 minutes. And so we'll do that next time.
That sounds fantastic. Always a treat to talk to you. His name is Dr. Allan Armitage. Look for his books. Look for his website. And especially, as we mentioned, if you're into cut flowers like many people are, look for those books also. Allan, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And we look forward to talking to you again.
All right. My pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me on. All the best.
Thank you so much.
Wow. Well, I feel like we've been visited by horticultural royalty today. I hope you enjoyed talking to Dr. Armitage as much as we did. And I want to thank you, Rick, for setting that up. Thanks, Adriana, for all of your hard work. And thank you all to you for listening. We hope you have a wonderful week ahead.